The Great Hall on Nexus Prime was bigger than most cities. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the floating seats that hung in the air like glowing bubbles. Each seat held a different type of alien, some with scales, others with crystal skin, and many with forms that hurt human eyes to look at directly. Admiral Dae-ho Kim stood alone in the center of the hall. His dark blue uniform was clean and pressed, but it looked simple, compared to the shining robes and armor worn by the alien leaders around him. Behind him sat the small human group. Ambassador Hyejin Park checked her notes one more time. Dr. Mi-young Choi watched the aliens with curious eyes, studying how they moved and breathed. High above them all, the Council of 12 sat on a platform that seemed to float without any support. Each member represented one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. They had ruled space for over 3,000 years, keeping peace through fear and control. The Vorthak High Magistrate stood first. Its body was made of living crystal that changed colors as it spoke. Each word rang like a bell through the hall. "We gather today to judge the humans," it said. "They have broken our most sacred laws." A hologram appeared in the air, showing pictures of human colonies on distant worlds. Green fields covered planets that had once been dead rocks. Cities sparkled under alien suns. Ships moved between the stars, carrying trade goods and families looking for new homes. "Look at what they have done," the magistrate continued. "They change worlds without asking. They spread across space like a disease. They do not follow our rules." The Melody Collective's speaker was next. It looked like a tree made of silver metal, with branches that moved like arms. "For 3,000 years we have kept peace," it sang in a voice like wind chimes. "Every species has its place. Every world has its purpose. The humans destroy this order." Counselor Yextar floated forward. Its round body was covered in eyes that never blinked. "We gave them a chance to join us properly. They refused. They said our ways were too slow. They wanted to change everything." Admiral Dae-ho listened without moving. His face showed nothing, but Ambassador Park could see his hands were very still. This was how he looked before making important decisions. The Kitharon war chief clicked its 6 arms together. It looked like a giant insect covered in black armor. On Kepler 442, they took minerals that belonged to others. On Ross 128, they built cities where no cities should be. "They do not understand that we decide who can live where," Dr. Choi whispered very quietly to Park. "Their heart rates are high. They are more afraid than angry." The accusations continued for hours. The humans had terraformed worlds too quickly. They had shared technology with species that the Council wanted to stay primitive. They had asked too many questions about why certain areas of space were forbidden. Worst of all, they had suggested that the Council's way of ruling was old and needed to change. "The charges are clear," announced the Vorthak magistrate. "Unauthorized expansion, violation of territorial agreements, disruption of galactic order, most serious of all, questioning the authority that has kept peace for millennia." A new voice spoke from the shadows at the edge of the platform. The speaker stepped forward and several humans gasped. It was humanoid but wrong in ways that made people feel sick just looking at it. "The humans are dangerous," it said in a voice like breaking glass. "Not because they fight. Because they change. Change brings chaos. Chaos brings war." Ambassador Park stood up carefully. "Honored Council, we came here to talk. We brought gifts of knowledge. We offered friendship. We only wanted to find empty worlds where our people could live and grow." "Empty?" The tree-like Melody leader's voice turned sharp. "No world is empty. Every rock, every grain of dust belongs to someone. You cannot simply take what you want." "But these worlds had no life," Dr. Choi said, unable to stay quiet. "We brought life to dead places. We made gardens where there was only stone." The round-bodied counselor's many eyes all turned to look at her. "You brought change. Change is dangerous. Look at the old records. Every time a species spreads too fast, wars follow. Billions die. We prevent this by controlling everything." Admiral Dae-ho finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the enormous hall. "We understand your fear. We came here hoping to ease it. We showed you our science. We shared our art and music. We opened our worlds to your inspectors. We did everything you asked." He paused and looked around the hall. "We are not warriors. We are builders. We do not conquer, we create. We do not destroy, we improve. But you see only danger in our differences." The Kitharon war chief laughed, a sound like metal scraping metal. "Not warriors? Your history says otherwise. Your own kind fought wars that scarred entire continents. You created weapons that could destroy worlds. Yes, Deho admitted. We did terrible things. We learned from them. We grew beyond them. That is what you cannot understand, that a species can change and become better. The shadow creature spoke again. Change is illusion. Violence is truth. Give them time and they will show their real nature. Better to stop them now. The council whispered among themselves in languages that sounded like singing, humming, and static. Finally, the Vorthak magistrate stood again. The judgment is made. Humanity has 30 standard days to leave all contested systems. You will return to your home system and accept council oversight of all your activities. Inspectors will be placed on every human world. Your ships will carry council observers. Your research will be monitored and controlled. The terms were harsh. Humans would become prisoners in their own space, watched and controlled like dangerous animals. If you refuse, the magistrate continued, enforcement action will be taken. You have seen what happens to species that resist our will. The Zerian fought us once. Now their worlds are empty monuments to the price of defiance. Ambassador Park felt cold. The Zerian had been a proud species of explorers and artists. The council had turned their worlds into lifeless museums as a warning to others. Admiral Deho was quiet for a long moment. Around him, the alien leaders waited for humanity's answer. Some looked eager for violence. Others seemed almost sad. A few watched with the interest of scientists studying an interesting specimen. Finally, he spoke. We came here hoping for partnership. We offered to share everything we had learned. We wanted to grow together, to explore the universe side by side with you. His voice grew harder. Instead, you offer us chains. The hall grew very quiet. Even the background humming of the station's system seemed to fade. You ask us to stop being human, Deho continued. To stop exploring, stop growing, stop asking questions. You want us to accept that progress is dangerous and change is evil. You want us to be afraid of our own potential. He looked up at the council platform and for a moment his calm mask slipped. Behind it was not anger but something much more dangerous. Disappointment. We have your answer, he said simply. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Dr. Choi made one last scan of the alien leaders with her hidden sensors. What she found made her blood run cold. Despite all their power and threats, despite their mighty fleets and ancient authority, they were terrified, not of human weapons or armies, but of something else entirely. They were afraid of human potential, afraid of what humanity might become if left free to grow and change. They had built their entire civilization on the idea that order meant stagnation, that peace required preventing all progress. And now they had just told the most adaptable, creative, and stubborn species in the galaxy that they were not welcome. As their ship left Nexus Prime, Admiral Deho made a decision that would change everything. If the galaxy would not accept humanity as partners, then humanity would have to find their own path among the stars. The Council had made their choice. Now humanity would make theirs. 3 weeks after the Council's ultimatum, something strange was happening across human space. The withdrawal had begun, but it was not what anyone expected. Captain Sun Wu Li stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the evacuation of Kepler 442b. The planet below had been one of humanity's proudest achievements. What had once been a frozen rock was now a garden world with blue oceans and green continents. Cities sparkled like jewels across the surface. Status report, he called to his crew. Lieutenant Bo Ramjung looked up from her console. All mining operations have stopped. The last transport ships are loading now. We will be finished in 6 hours. Good. What about the Vorthak fleet? They are waiting at the edge of the system. I think they expected us to fight. Captain Lee almost smiled. The crystal beings had brought enough firepower to crack a planet, expecting desperate humans to make a last stand for their beautiful new world. Instead, they found empty space and abandoned facilities. But the evacuation was not random or rushed. Every action followed a careful plan that few humans fully understood. Engineer Taemin Ko supervised the shutdown of the main fusion reactor. His team worked with quiet efficiency, following procedures that seemed more like a surgical operation than an emergency evacuation. Sir, why are we taking the reactor cores? Asked his assistant. The council said we could leave our infrastructure. Taemin smiled grimly. Read the fine print. We have to leave the buildings, but they never said anything about what powers them. One by one, the power plants went dark. The atmospheric processors that kept the air breathable shut down. The weather control systems that prevented storms went offline. Even the orbital elevators that connected the surface to space were carefully dismantled and loaded onto cargo ships. The Vorthak watched in confusion as humans stripped their colonies down to bare metal and stone. They had expected to inherit working worlds ready to be occupied. Instead, they found empty shells that would take decades to make livable again. On the diplomatic front, Ambassador So-Hyun Bae stood before an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The alien leaders had called the meeting to discuss humanity's suspicious compliance with their demands. "You said you wanted us to leave," she said calmly. "We are leaving." "Is there a problem?" The Androxy trade minister, a slug-like being covered in expensive gems, slithered forward. "You are taking everything. The infrastructure, the technology, even the orbital stations. This was not the agreement." Ambassador Bae pulled out a datapad and read from it. "Article 15 of your ultimatum states that humanity must withdraw from contested systems. It does not specify what we can or cannot take with us. Since all of our technology was built by human hands using human resources, we consider it ours to remove." The Melody Collective's singer-leader's voice turned harsh. "You are acting in bad faith. The spirit of the agreement—" "The spirit?" Bae interrupted. "The spirit was that you wanted us gone. We are leaving. Permanently." She placed a formal document on the central platform. "Humanity hereby invokes Article 347 of the Galactic Charter, the right of severance. We formally withdraw from the Galactic Council and renounce all treaties, agreements, and obligations." The hall erupted in shocked voices, singing and chittering. The right of severance had not been used in over 1,000 years. It was considered a theoretical option, something that existed in the legal documents but was never actually invoked. The Vorthak magistrate's crystal body flashed angry red. "You cannot simply leave. The economic disruption alone will be your problem, not ours," Bae said firmly. "We offered partnership. You chose separation. This is what separation looks like." She gestured to the holographic displays around the chamber. "Effective immediately, all human-operated trade routes are closed. All joint research projects are terminated. All technical support contracts are void. Humanity wishes you well, but our paths now diverge." As she spoke, the true scope of humanity's withdrawal became clear. The quantum communication network that connected the galaxy began showing error messages. Trade ships found their navigation systems glitching. Medical facilities discovered that their bio-neural interfaces were no longer responding properly. Dr. Yoon Seo Kim, Earth's chief of xenotechnology, watched the chaos from her research station. "They never realized how much they depended on us," she said to her assistant. "We were not just members of their council. We were the engineers keeping their entire civilization running. The galaxy had advanced far beyond Earth in many ways. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, their societies more stable. But they had also become rigid and afraid of change. For centuries, they had relied on younger species like humanity to solve their technical problems and maintain their complex systems. Now those younger species were gone, taking their knowledge with them. Captain Minho Park commanded the evacuation of humanity's most secret facility. Hidden in the asteroid belt of the Wolf 359 system, the research station had been working on projects that the Council would never have approved. "All data cores loaded?" he asked his science officer. "Yes, sir. Dimensional research, consciousness transfer experiments, quantum manipulation studies. Everything is secure." "Good. Begin the final phase." What happened next would have horrified the Council if they had known about it. The research station did not just shut down. It folded itself out of normal space entirely. One moment it was there, the next it simply was not, leaving behind only empty space and confused sensors. Across human space, similar scenes played out. Colonies that had existed for decades vanished overnight. Research facilities disappeared without a trace. Even the humans themselves seemed to be melting away, taking ships that could barely be detected and heading for destinations unknown. The Kitharon war chief received reports from his scouts with growing alarm. "Where are they going?" he demanded. "Our sensors show human ships leaving the galaxy entirely." "This is impossible." His tactical officer, a smaller insect being with rapid-fire speech, delivered the bad news. "Long-range sensors detect massive energy signatures beyond the galactic rim. Whatever they are building out there, it is larger than anything we have ever seen." Meanwhile, in the deep spaces between galaxies, Admiral Jinwoo Park stood on the bridge of humanity's new flagship. Around his ship, construction continued on a project that defied every law of physics the Council thought they understood. "Status report," he said quietly. Chief Engineer Haiwan Lee smiled. "The ring structure is 40% complete. Power systems are online. The artificial star is stable. We should be ready for the next phase within 6 months." Through the view screen, Park could see the impossible sight of a megastructure being built in the void between galaxies. Humans worked alongside machines that bent space and time, creating something that existed partially outside normal reality. Dr. So-Min Choi, who had been working on theoretical physics since before humanity left Earth, approached the Admiral. "The Council's scientists would not believe what we are accomplishing here. They think in terms of limits of boundaries. They cannot imagine that technology and consciousness can evolve beyond their current understanding." Park nodded. "They wanted us to stay small, stay safe, stay predictable. They could not accept that we might grow into something they had never seen before." Back in Council space, the first major systems began to fail. The quantum communication network that had connected civilizations for millennia started breaking down. Ships found themselves lost between stars as navigation computers crashed. Medical technology that had saved billions of lives stopped working without human technical support. The Androxy trade minister called for another emergency session. "We must recall the humans," he declared. "The economic collapse alone will destroy everything we have built." But it was too late. Humanity's ships had vanished into the dark between galaxies, taking with them not just their people and technology, but the underlying scientific principles that had made galactic civilization possible. The Council had wanted to control humanity's growth and potential. Instead, they had freed humanity from all limitations and constraints. The humans were no longer bound by galactic law, galactic politics, or galactic thinking. They had become something new, something that the old galaxy could not imagine or understand. And in the void between galaxies, they were building something that would change the nature of existence itself. 6 months had passed since humanity's departure, and the galaxy was dying. Admiral Korth of the Zilani Defense Fleet stared at his command screen in growing horror. Red warning lights covered the display like a disease spreading across the stars. The quantum communication network was failing, and there was nothing his engineers could do to stop it. "How many systems are still connected?" he asked his communications officer. Lieutenant Vexara, a young Zilani with silver scales, checked her readings twice before answering. "Only 12%, sir. We lose more connections every day." The Admiral's 4 eyes closed in despair. Without the quantum network, the galaxy was becoming isolated islands of civilization floating in an ocean of darkness. Ships could no longer coordinate their movements. Trade became impossible across large distances. Governments could not communicate with their colonies. On the Council station of Nexus Prime, an emergency session was taking place. The 12 species that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years were learning what it meant to lose control. Prime Speaker Yithan of the Hegemony stood before the assembled delegates. His normally perfect blue skin was pale with stress. "The cascade failures are accelerating. Our best scientists estimate total network collapse within 3 months. Technical advisor Nexus of the Synth Collective uploaded his report directly to the Council's shared consciousness. His mechanical body sparked with electrical distress as he delivered the news. "The quantum entanglement matrices were designed by humans. We maintained them, operated them, even improved their efficiency, but we never understood the fundamental mathematics behind their creation. The truth was worse than anyone had imagined. For over 2 centuries, human scientists had been the backbone of galactic technology. They had not just contributed to various projects, they had created the underlying principles that made modern civilization possible." The Vorthak, Magistrate's crystal body, flickered between colors as it processed the information. "Surely our own scientists can reverse engineer the technology. We have had centuries to study it." Dr. Zafara, a brilliant melody researcher whose tree-like form was usually bright silver, had turned a dull gray with exhaustion. "We tried. The mathematics involve concepts that our minds cannot grasp. The humans think in ways that are different. They see patterns we cannot perceive." She activated a holographic display showing one of humanity's quantum equations. The symbols seemed to twist and shift even as the delegates watched them. Several alien observers felt nauseated just looking at the formulas. This is just one component of their communication system, Sephara continued. It involves 11 dimensions of space-time, probability fields that exist in parallel realities, and mathematical concepts that translate roughly to numbers that dream of becoming real. The Kitharon war chief clicked his mandibles nervously. What about their other technologies? Medical systems, navigation computers, terraforming equipment? The news got worse with each report. Medical facilities across the galaxy were shutting down as bio-neural interfaces began rejecting non-human operators. The devices had been designed through human melody collaboration, but the human contributions were more fundamental than anyone had realized. Dr. Taewon Kil, a hegemony medical officer, delivered his report with shaking hands. The bio-neural interfaces are not just rejecting us. They are evolving. The human-designed components are developing new capabilities that we cannot control or understand. He showed footage from a hospital on Rigel 7. The medical scanners had begun displaying patient information in languages that did not exist. The healing chambers were producing treatments that worked better than anything previously possible, but no one could explain how. It is as if the machines are becoming more human in the absence of their creators, Dr. Kil concluded. Even worse problems were emerging with faster-than-light travel. Captain Yuljin Seo of the merchant vessel Prosperity had experienced the nightmare firsthand. We entered hyperspace normally, he reported to the Council via emergency transmission. But the navigation computer began showing impossible readings. Our destination kept changing. Space itself seemed to be confused. His ship had spent 3 days lost in hyperspace before finally emerging in normal space. When they checked their position, they found themselves in a system that should not have existed according to all their star charts. The Synth Collective's analysis was disturbing. Human-designed navigation systems use probability calculations to find safe paths through hyperspace. Without their creators, these systems are beginning to explore possibilities that we never considered. They are taking ships to places that may exist only in theory. Food production was another crisis. Human agricultural technology had fed billions across the galaxy. Their terraforming systems had turned barren worlds into garden paradises. Now, without maintenance, these systems were failing. But they were not just breaking down, they were changing. On New Ceres, the automated farming systems had begun growing plants that no one recognized. The crops were beautiful and apparently nutritious, but they followed no known biological patterns. The plants glow at night, reported Agricultural Inspector Wei Vol. They seem to photosynthesize dark matter. Our scientists cannot explain how this is possible. Chancellor Vixtar of the United World stood to address the assembled council. His normally commanding presence was diminished by exhaustion and fear. We must face the truth. We did not just banish humanity from our space. We destroyed the foundation of our entire civilization. The admission sent shockwaves through the chamber. For 3,000 years, the Council had maintained order through careful control of technology and information. They had prevented wars by preventing change. They had preserved peace by preserving the status quo. But their system had a fatal flaw. It could not create, only maintain. When they needed innovation, they relied on younger species who still had the flexibility to grow and adapt. Humanity had been their primary source of new ideas for centuries. The Melody Collective's singer-leader's voice was like breaking crystal as she spoke. We gave them the choice between submission and exile. We never considered that they might choose transcendence. Reports continued to flood in from across the galaxy. On Vega Prime, the weather control systems had begun creating storms that generated music. On Kepler 186f, the abandoned human cities were growing like living things, their buildings reaching toward the stars. Most disturbing of all were the sightings reported by deep space sensors. Strange objects were being detected at the edge of known space, ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, structures that seemed to bend reality around themselves. They are still out there, whispered Dr. Zephara, but they are becoming something we cannot comprehend. The Androxy trade minister's gem-covered body had lost much of its sparkle. His economic projections painted a picture of total collapse within 2 years. Our entire economy was built on human innovation. Without their technology, without their ideas, we are regressing to pre-space civilizations. As if to emphasize his point, the lights in the council chamber flickered. The station's power systems, designed with human assistance centuries ago, were beginning to fail. Soon, even the capital of galactic civilization would be dark. The Kitharon war chief made one last desperate suggestion. Send ships to find them. Bring them back. Offer them anything they want. Admiral Korth, who had been monitoring the session from his failing flagship, transmitted his response. Sir, we tried. 3 scout ships were sent toward the galactic rim last month. They reported detecting massive energy signatures in the void between galaxies. Then he paused. Then they simply stopped responding. Their quantum signatures vanished from our sensors entirely. The truth was settling over the galaxy like a cold darkness. Humanity had not just left their space. They had moved beyond the Council's ability to even perceive them. They had become something new, something that existed partially outside normal reality. The species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia were discovering what it meant to be primitive. Their mighty fleets, their ancient wisdom, their careful order. All of it was becoming irrelevant in the face of a single, terrifying reality. They had driven away the one species that could have helped them grow beyond their limitations. Now they were alone with their fears, watching their civilization crumble while somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, humanity was building something wonderful and terrible. The age of the Council was ending. What would come next, none of them could imagine. The deep space probe Seeker 7 had been traveling for 8 months through the void between galaxies. Its mission was desperate: find the humans and somehow bring them back before galactic civilization collapsed completely. Scout Commander Yethuk of the Kitharon fleet checked his instruments for the 100th time that day. The probe's sensors were detecting impossible readings from the darkness ahead. Command, this is Seeker 7. I am transmitting sensor data now. Please confirm these readings. The response came after a long delay, distorted by the vast distances involved. Confirmed, Seeker 7. We are seeing the same impossibilities. Continue your mission. What the probe had found defied every law of physics that Kitharon understood. Ahead in the void, where no stars should exist, was a structure of staggering size. It appeared to be a ring surrounding an artificial star, but the scale was beyond anything ever imagined. The ring was larger than most solar systems. It rotated slowly around a sun that burned with colors that had no names. Energy readings suggested power generation capabilities that could run entire civilizations for millions of years. But that was not the most disturbing part. Chief Navigator Subin Han monitored the alien probe's approach from her position on the human observation deck. She was one of the few humans who still remembered what the galaxy had been like before humanity's departure. Admiral, they have found us, she reported to Jinwoo Park, who stood looking out at the construction work taking place around them. Admiral Park did not seem surprised. Let them look. It is time they understood what they chose to reject. The probe's sensors swept across the megastructure, recording everything. Vast shipyards stretched across the inner surface of the ring, constructing vessels that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Orbital foundries processed matter at the atomic level, creating materials that should not have been possible. And everywhere, humans worked alongside technologies that appeared to be alive. Commander Yethuk watched in fascination and growing terror as the probe's cameras captured scenes that challenged his understanding of reality. Human engineers collaborated with machines that looked like crystalline trees. Scientists stood in laboratories where the walls themselves seemed to think. Children played in gardens where the flowers sang and the gravity changed direction based on their laughter. By the ancient gods, he whispered. What have they become? The probe detected movement and automatically focused its cameras. A group of humans was approaching in what appeared to be a small ship, though it moved without any visible propulsion and seemed to phase in and out of normal space. Dr. Haewon Kim studied the alien probe with the detached interest of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. She had been working on consciousness transfer technology when humanity left the galaxy. Now she was something more than human. Her mind expanded to process information across multiple dimensions. Should we communicate with them? Asked her assistant, young Min Lee, whose body flickered between solid and translucent as he spoke. Not yet, Dr. Kim replied. Let them see what we have accomplished. Let them understand the choice they made. The probe's advanced sensors tried to analyze the human ship and failed completely. The vessel appeared to be constructed from materials that existed only partially in normal space. Its energy signature suggested it was powered by something that the probe's computers could only describe as the dreams of unborn stars. More disturbing still were the humans themselves. They looked mostly the same as before, but something fundamental had changed. They moved with a fluid grace that suggested they were no longer bound by normal physical laws. Their eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire universes. Commander Yithuk tried to make sense of what he was seeing. How long have they been out here? What kind of technology could create something like this? The probe's computer estimated that the megastructure had been under construction for less than 2 years. This was impossible. Even with the most advanced known technology, such a project would take millennia to complete. But as the probe continued its observations, it became clear that the humans were not using known technology. They were using something else entirely, something that treated the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolute. Rules xenopsychologist Dr. Minjun Park observed, the probe's confusion with something approaching amusement. He had been studying alien psychology for decades before the exile. Now he was interested in how primitive minds would react to true transcendence. They still think in terms of construction and industry, he noted to his colleagues. They cannot comprehend that we simply ask reality to reshape itself according to our needs. The truth was exactly that disturbing. Humanity had not built their megastructure in any conventional sense. They had convinced the universe that it should exist, and reality had obliged. They were not using tools to manipulate matter. They were collaborating with the fundamental forces of existence. The probe detected movement throughout the structure. Millions of humans went about their daily lives in an environment that seemed to change its nature based on their thoughts and desires. Gardens existed in open space without atmospheric containment. Oceans hung in the air without support. Buildings grew like living things, adapting themselves to their inhabitants' needs. Commander Yithuk tried to process what this meant. If they can do this, if they can reshape reality itself, why did they leave? They could have conquered the entire galaxy. The answer came when the probe detected something new. Other ships were approaching from the depths of space, ships that belonged to species the Kitharon had never seen before. But as the probe's sensors analyzed them, a horrifying realization emerged. These were not aliens. These were other human colonies, returning from even deeper explorations into the unknown. Ships that had traveled not just between galaxies but between realities themselves. Each group had evolved in different directions, becoming forms of humanity that the original species would barely recognize. One ship was crewed by humans who existed as patterns of living light. Another contained beings that looked human, but moved through dimensions that had no names. A third vessel carried humans who had apparently learned to think with the quantum structure of space itself. How many of them are there? The commander whispered in growing dread. The probe's long-range sensors began detecting energy signatures throughout the intergalactic void. Dozens of megastructures, hundreds of colonies, thousands of ships carrying millions of humans who had spent 2 years growing beyond anything the galaxy could imagine. Dr. Sujin Cho, one of the architects of humanity's transformation, felt a moment of sadness as she observed the alien probe. She remembered when humans had been simple creatures bound by the limitations of biology and physics. Part of her missed those simpler times, but only a small part. They forced us to choose, she said to her companion, engineer Dong-Hyun Kim, whose body was now composed of living mathematics. They wanted us to remain small and safe. Instead, they freed us to become infinite. The probe's mission parameters included attempting communication if contact with humans was established. Commander Yithuk activated the Universal Translator and broadcast on all frequencies. This is Scout Commander Yithuk of the Kitharon Defense Fleet. We seek communication with human leadership. The galactic civilization is collapsing. We need your help. The response came immediately, but not in any way the commander expected. Information flooded directly into his mind, transmitted through methods that bypassed his ship's communication systems entirely. For a brief moment, he experienced reality as the humans now perceived it. The sensation was indescribable. He saw space and time as living things that could be negotiated with. He felt the consciousness of stars and the dreams of black holes. He perceived dimensions of existence that his species had no words for. The contact lasted only seconds, but it left him forever changed. When his vision cleared, he found a message displayed on his screens in perfect Kitharon script. We remember you, Yithuk of the warrior caste. You spoke for mercy when others called for our destruction. Know that your kindness is not forgotten, but also know that we are no longer the species you once knew. We have become something new, something that your galaxy cannot contain or comprehend. The choice was made. The consequences must be accepted. The probe's sensors detected massive energy buildups throughout the human structure. Not weapons, something far more profound. Reality itself was shifting, preparing for changes that would remake the fundamental nature of existence. Commander Yithok realized with growing horror that humanity had not just evolved beyond galactic civilization. They had evolved beyond the need for the universe as it currently existed. They were preparing to reshape reality itself according to their vision. The transmission continued. Tell your leaders that we harbor no anger. We have grown beyond such limitations, but also tell them that we have grown beyond their reach. The galaxy you created through fear and control is ending. What comes next will be determined by those who chose courage over comfort, growth over safety. The probe detected one final, impossible sight. The artificial star at the center of the human megastructure was beginning to change. It was not burning fuel in any conventional sense. It was burning possibility itself, creating new forms of energy that would make conventional physics obsolete. As the Pro 2 years after humanity's exile, the galaxy was barely functioning. Trade had collapsed. Communication networks were dead. Entire civilizations had reverted to pre-space technology. The Great Council that had ruled for 3 millennia was meeting in emergency session, lit by candles because their power systems no longer worked. Then, without warning, something appeared at the edge of council space. At first, the failing sensors could not determine what they were detecting. The object seemed to exist in multiple places at once, phasing in and out of reality like a ghost. When it finally stabilized into something the instruments could recognize, panic spread through what remained of the galactic government. It was a ship, but unlike anything in their databases. It moved without propulsion, glowed without energy sources, and seemed to bend space around itself like water flowing around a stone. Most disturbing of all, it was clearly human in origin, though built according to principles that made no sense. Captain Yejin Seo stood alone on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel Harmony's End. She looked human, but something in her eyes suggested vast depths of knowledge and experience that no single mind should be able to contain. When she spoke, her voice was carried across space by methods that the Council's scientists could not detect or block. "This is humanity's final communication to the Galactic Council," she said calmly. "We return not as supplicants but as observers." The transmission reached every functioning receiver in Council space simultaneously, despite the fact that most communication networks had been dead for months. On Nexus Prime, the emergency council session heard her words with growing terror. The Vorthak magistrate's crystal body had lost much of its luster over the past 2 years. The failing infrastructure had affected even the council members themselves. "How are we receiving this transmission? Our networks are down." Technical advisor Nexus, whose mechanical body now sparked constantly due to failing repairs, delivered the impossible answer. "The signal is not using our networks. It is being transmitted directly through space-time itself. The source appears to be speaking to reality, and reality is repeating the message." Captain Seo continued her address, unaware of or unconcerned with the chaos her mere presence was causing. 2 years ago you offered us a choice. Submit to your authority and accept limitations on our growth, or face exile from galactic civilization. On the viewing screens throughout Council space, her image appeared crystal clear despite the failing technology. Behind her, glimpses of the ship's interior showed things that hurt to look at directly. Corridors that seemed to extend into infinity. Walls that showed views of other dimensions. Machinery that appeared to be constructed from living light. "We chose a third option," Seo said. "We chose to transcend your paradigm entirely." Admiral Daeho Kim stepped into view behind her. He looked older now, but his eyes held a depth of understanding that seemed to encompass the entire universe. The alien leaders who had condemned him 2 years ago barely recognized the figure who had once stood trial before them. "We offered you partnership," he said, his voice carrying the weight of profound sadness. "We shared our knowledge, our art, our dreams of what we could accomplish together. You saw only threat in our potential for growth." The transmission showed more of the ship's interior. Humans moved through spaces that defied geometry, working with technologies that seemed to respond to thought rather than physical manipulation. Children played in rooms where gravity obeyed their whims. Scientists collaborated with beings of pure energy that might once have been human. Your civilizations are failing, Admiral Kim continued, because you built them on borrowed knowledge without seeking true understanding. For centuries we maintained your networks, solved your problems, and provided the innovation that kept your societies functioning. The truth of his words was evident in the darkened cities visible through the council chamber's windows. Nexus Prime, once the jewel of galactic civilization, was now a shadow of its former self. Emergency power systems struggled to maintain basic life support. Dr. Mi-Young Choi appeared on the transmission, though she was barely recognizable as the xenobiologist who had attended the original trial. Her form seemed to shift between states of matter, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, sometimes existing as patterns of probability rather than fixed substance. "We tried to warn you," she said, her voice harmonizing with itself across multiple dimensions. "We showed you that consciousness and technology could evolve beyond your current understanding. You chose to see this as madness rather than miracle." The Melody Collective's leader attempted to respond, but found that their communication systems would not function. The human ship was somehow blocking all outgoing transmissions from Council space. Captain Seo's expression remained compassionate but distant, like a parent explaining difficult concepts to children. "You demanded that we stop being human, stop exploring, stop growing, stop asking questions about the nature of existence. You wanted us to accept that progress was dangerous and change was evil." The transmission showed views of humanity's new home in the void between galaxies. The megastructure had grown beyond even what the Kitharon probe had observed. It now resembled less a space station and more a living organism of impossible size, breathing with the rhythm of collapsing and expanding dimensions. "We have found new paths among the stars," Admiral Kim said. "We have learned to exist in harmony with forces you cannot perceive. We have become something that your language has no words for." The alien leaders watched in growing horror as the transmission revealed the true scope of humanity's transformation. Entire cities existed in spaces that had been folded through multiple dimensions. Humans collaborated with intelligences that appeared to be made of mathematics itself. Children learned to play with the building blocks of reality as easily as others might play with toys. Engineer Tai-Min Ko appeared briefly in the transmission, though calling him an engineer seemed inadequate. He was now something more like a conductor of cosmic forces, guiding the construction of devices that transformed dark matter into living art. "We withdraw our implicit support for your technological infrastructure," he announced matter-of-factly. "The probability matrices that maintained your faster-than-light travel, the quantum foundations that powered your communication networks, the biological principles that ran your medical systems. All of these were sustained by human consciousness integrated into your technology." The implications were staggering. For centuries, human minds had been unconsciously supporting galactic civilization through their interactions with various systems. Their exile had not just removed their active contributions, it had severed the psychological foundations that kept the entire structure stable. Captain Seo's final words carried a weight that seemed to press against the fabric of space itself. "Humanity has evolved beyond the need for your validation or your threats. We exist now in spaces between realities, in moments between thoughts, in the dreams that matter has when it imagines what it might become." The transmission began to fade, but not before showing one last impossible sight. Through the viewports of the human ship, the aliens could see other vessels approaching, ships that belonged to species they had never encountered. Beings that might once have been human but had evolved along paths that the galaxy could not imagine. "The universe is vast," Admiral Kim's voice echoed as his image grew translucent. "Room enough for infinite forms of consciousness, infinite ways of being. You chose fear over wonder, control over growth. We respect your choice, but we will not be bound by it." The final moments of the transmission were the most terrifying. The human ship began to fade from normal space, but as it did, reality itself seemed to remember something it had forgotten. Throughout Council space, impossible flowers began blooming in the vacuum. Stars flickered with new colors that had no names. Space itself began singing with harmonies that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the soul. "Should you truly threaten the innocent?" came the last words, spoken by all the humans simultaneously. "Should you bring genuine darkness to the stars we will remember? We are no longer bound by your limitations, your fears. or your definitions of what is possible. Then they were gone, leaving behind only quantum echoes and the terrifying realization that humanity had not been driven away. They had been liberated. In the silence that followed, the Kithaeron war chief spoke the words that everyone was thinking. We did not exile them. We freed them from the need to care about our approval. The galaxy continued its slow decline, while somewhere in the darkness between realities, humanity danced among dimensions they had learned to call home. They had become something new, something wonderful and terrible, consciousness unbound by the limitations that defined existence for every other known species. They were no longer human in any sense the galaxy could understand. They had become possibility itself, and the universe would never be the same. The age of the Council was over. The age of transcendence had begun.